According to LinkedIn's Global Talent Trend Report, 64% of learning and development professionals cite closing skill gaps as their top priority. What this suggests is that knowledge gaps are a significant concern for organizations worldwide. Hi there, my name is Anita Adefuye. I am the CEO and founder of Advanced and Fulfilled Coaching Company. We are a company dedicated to helping immigrated professionals establish their careers here in Canada. And for those who are newer immigrated professionals, we also help you navigate your job search process, making it easy, seamless, and without overwhelm. And for other individuals, we help you advance in your career and provide strategies. Right here on our YouTube channel, one of the things we do is provide video content, resources, of course, free. And this is to help individuals find the right information they need to help them advance in their careers. And today we want to talk about one of the important gaps that you need to close. In one of our some of our previous videos, we've been looking at a series on 5 key gaps you have to close if you're going to advance in your career. And we talked about the skill gap, the knowledge gap, experience gap, network gap, and confidence gap. So far, we have looked at the importance of closing these gaps, and we have also looked at skills gap. Today, we're going to delve into knowledge gap, what knowledge gap is, why it is important that you close knowledge gap, and how exactly you get to do that. That is what we're going to be covering today. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. So what is knowledge gap? Like skill gaps, knowledge gap really is the difference between the information an employee should have or should know versus what their organization actually needs them to know. Now, I will take that a step further because it's not always just about the organization you're working in, but what you should know as it pertains to your industry, your field, versus what you actually know. Everything in between, that's your knowledge gap. And this is important because you need to stay updated with changing trends in your industry. And particularly for new immigrants, this is also important because you need to know certain things. In some instances, they might seem like nuanced things that you should know, but in other cases, they're just differences based on geographical locations that one should know about things or certain things that they may not be aware of. And this can range anywhere from technical knowledge to soft knowledge. And I'll give you an example. So technical knowledge, for instance, might be certain regulations. So let's say if you're a safety professional, certain regulations that guide the safety industry that you may or may not be aware of, that you may not know, that you ought to know, right? And if you don't know that, you may know how that regulation applies in the country you're coming from. If you're coming from Turkey or Nigeria or Ghana, wherever you're coming from, you may know how those regulations apply. But do you know how they apply here in Canada? If you don't, that right there is a knowledge gap. You are not lacking in skill. You are not lacking in the ability to do the work, but that lack of knowledge can be very detrimental, not just to you, but to a potential employer. And so it's important that you know how those things apply. That's an example of something that is a little more technical or hard knowledge. Now, a soft knowledge, on the other hand, might be something as simple as understanding that in Canada, right, there is, let's say, 2 coffee breaks, okay, and you can access that. If you don't know that, I mean, that's a very simplistic way of putting that, right? But if you don't know that, you might find yourself working long hours. It's something that seems nuanced, and I mean, people know and still do not take their coffee break. But I see sometimes new immigrants come in, they're in workplaces, they're not taking coffee breaks and taking needful rest or taking breaks as they ought to. And then they work long hours and they get burnt out, and that's not good, not for you, not for your organization as well. These things have long-term overtime effects, right? And that's something a little more nuanced and a little less hardcore knowledge. But it's also very vital, or maybe even how to form form connections in workplaces, the right things to say, or how to frame certain things at the workplace. Okay. So for instance, if you're from certain countries, you can maybe walk up to a woman and shake hands with her, or maybe not, right? But then if you come to Canada, and let's say reverse is the case. So let's say you're coming from a country where you don't shake women, and there are cultures like that. Some are also religiously inclined, and they don't shake women, right? The men don't shake women, like you don't shake the opposite gender, so to speak. And you come to Canada and you shake hands with, and you don't shake hands with a woman, let's say your boss or at an interview, they might see that as being rude, but it's your lack of knowledge of what the cultural nuances are that is really impeding you at that point, and not necessarily anything hardcore. I mean, nobody might make any major job decisions over you because of that, but you never know, and it's always best to close those knowledge gaps. So it is important that you close the knowledge gap. And that right there is actually one reason that sometimes might cause knowledge gaps to exist. That people move countries, right? And you change geographical location, and what applies in country A may not always apply in the same way in country B. And if you do not know that, you might run into issues, and it's important that you are aware of those and you close such knowledge gap. So we've talked about geographical location change that can create a gap in knowledge. The other thing we're going to look about, and similar to skills gap, is rapid technological advancements. Okay, there are new tools to use, there are new applications to apply, and these different things can cause knowledge gap. If you don't know how to use it, you might run into issues. And I'll give you an example, especially with the pandemic. We saw a lot of organizations move to virtual work, and that became a thing, right? And remote work became a thing. But then there were people who, well, I hope not, but there are people who probably didn't know how to use certain tools, or they might know how to use tools like Zoom, but then it's a little, well, there's transferable skill to know how to apply Teams, and it can seem intuitive. It might not always be the case for everybody, and there's opportunities to learn and close some of that gap. That's just one example, and a very simplistic one at that. But rapid technological advancement can actually cause knowledge gap, where you might not be aware of new processes, new softwares, new changes, and all of that are going on. And then the third thing can also just be, lack of training and development. Now, whether this is coming from you as an individual, I believe strongly that individuals should invest in themselves, but at the same time, organizations should also invest in their employees to ensure that they provide training and development as part of employee packages. And this is important because from time to time, through conferences, maybe your organization pay for you to attend conferences or seminars, or just bringing in people to conduct certain training. That can be very helpful. The federal government just announced the federal budget, and within that budget, there's room for providing skill training to employees to ensure that the Canadian labor future is protected and filled with the right skills that individuals need to continue carrying on the labor market and provide the kind of labor that we need. So that's the kind of thing we want to see. Countries are putting that investment in, organizations put them in, but you as an employee, you also need to put in your own investment on yourself. Invest in yourself. You are valuable. And then the fourth thing is changing job responsibilities. Now, this is a little two-sided, and I'm going to speak at this from two angles. One is that you actually do experience a change in job. Every job, even the fastest learner will still need some time to catch up on something. There will be something new you might need to learn on that job. If there wasn't something that was going to challenge you and push you a little farther from where you are today, you probably won't be taking that change in job. Whatever the reason for your change in job, one thing is certain, there will be some new learnings you need to do. Now, the gap might exist at an organizational level where you need to learn the process and systems and structures of your new organization, including maybe products and services and what it entails. The other thing that maybe might happen is that if you were changing jobs as a result of maybe even just within restructuring within your organization, there would still be something to learn in that place. So a changing job responsibilities will create a knowledge gap, but you need to know what that knowledge gap is and seek to find ways to close that gap. Now, the other angle I want to talk about this is you may not have a changed job. You may not have changed jobs right away, but perhaps you're looking to change jobs in the future. A lot of people sometimes, one advice that I got that I really, really, really found valuable was someone once said to me that when you are looking to take a job today, don't just judge that job and the value it gives based on just what it gives you today, but think about how does this position me for the next 2 levels of the steps in my career. And what that means is this. A new job should challenge you. And for so many of us, we have career goals and aspirations, right? I hope you do. And when we're looking at our next level, when you're looking at that next level, you want to constantly, find that sweet balance between learning the competencies and skills and knowledge you need for today in your job to be successful today, but also learning how to use your job today to leverage and position yourself with the right skills and competencies and knowledge that you need for tomorrow or for the next level. And I'll give you an example. So let's say someone is in an analyst role. Let's assume, right? Let's say someone is in an analyst role and you're looking to go into more of a supervisory management level at some point, right? Now, you're not changing jobs today. But what are the knowledge that you need to know, that you need to have when that time comes? You're not going to wait till you get there to start acquiring that knowledge. While you're working to make sure that you're giving your best in your current position, you're also identifying where your knowledge gaps lie for that next position, and same applies with skills. And then you're working towards closing that gap today so that when the opportunity comes, you are well positioned with the right knowledge that you need and the skills and competencies that you need for that level. So those are the 2 ways that I want to talk about this, but there'll still be number 4, where we talk about changes in job responsibilities as part of the reasons why knowledge gap may occur. And then mismatched skills and job requirements. That can also create a knowledge gap. A lot of new immigrants, there's been cases with new immigrants coming into Canada and being underemployed. And this is a problem because on one hand, if you're underemployed, chances are that, especially if it's not in your field, chances are there's already even a knowledge gap even in that place and you're underemployed. So that's a double jeopardy. And that's not good. Not to mention, it creates even a wider gap for people to close the knowledge gap that they need for at par positions from where they're coming from. And so when people's jobs and their skill sets are mismatched, it automatically will create a knowledge gap. And then finally, we would look at not finally, but limited access to information as well. All right. Limited access to relevant information. Sometimes when people don't have access to the right information, to the right trainings, to the right places to even get those trainings, it can create a knowledge gap. And in some cases, even outdated knowledge. If the industry has moved further and the organization you work for, you yourself are not even aware with some of those changes that are occurring within your industry, that is a knowledge gap. How updated are you and aware of all the changes that are ongoing within your industry? And then the final one, which is very more, which is very prevalent within organizations and even maybe more from an organizational perspective too, is retirement and turnover. Now, again, this is why organizations need to invest in their employee skill development and knowledge development, because as people retire, as there are turnovers, as people leave, you want to make sure that you're not creating a knowledge gap and knowledge loop within your organization. And the only way to do that is to ensure that you're investing richly in professional development and training for current employees. So we have looked at the reasons why knowledge gap can exist. And now we're going to look at how you close the knowledge gap for yourself as an individual. As an individual, how do you close knowledge gaps and make sure that you're positioning yourself for career advancement? So the first way you want to tackle a knowledge gap is to do a self-assessment. All right. So you want to start by identifying specific areas where you know the gap exists. Is it technical? Is it industry knowledge? Is it soft skills, or is it something else? Or is it maybe just even within the organization where you work, or the role and things you need to know? So that's the first thing you want to do, is conduct a self-assessment and identify all the different areas that you may be lacking in knowledge. Now, the second thing you want to do is make sure that you're matching these assessments to not just your current role, but also your future plans. Again, like I said earlier, I hope that people do have career goals and plans and aspirations, right? And you're conducting this assessment alongside what that career plan is, to say, not just for today's role, but in the next 2 or 3 positions that I would love to see myself in. What are some of the things that I would need to know and I can start getting from now? It's easier to bite-size closing gaps and work towards a plan than to have to, wait and then deal with it all at once. That is not a smart move. So that's the second thing you need to do, is number one, do a self-assessment, and then number 2 is that you're aligning this assessment to your career goals and visions. So once you have assessed where the gaps are and you've put this in line with your career goals, the next thing you want to do is categorize different opportunities and how to close these gaps. And not every knowledge gap will need or require formal education, right? And before I even delve further into this, I just want to talk to newcomers to Canada, new professionals a little bit, because one of the things that I find that tends to happen is that when newcomers come, they hear all about the Canadian experience and then they get all rattled about that. And the next thing they know is the registering in universities and trying to take courses and do all of that. You may not require that, right? The way we work with our clients and what we do is that once we identify what your career goals and aspirations are, and we identify the things that you need, oftentimes what we find is that most people already have the educational qualification and they already have some of the skills. It just needs to be translated in a way that makes sense within a Canadian context. And that's it. But in some other instances, you may find out that yes, you do need that additional education. But I've seen people go in and sign up for 4-year bachelor programs, master's degree that they may or may not need. And I know that no knowledge is lost, but time is lost, money is lost, energy is lost, resources is lost that could have been avoided, right? Now, if you identify you don't need all those things, but still choose to go ahead and get them anyway, that's a different ballgame, because then you're making informed decision. But when that is not the case, you want to make sure you identify what that knowledge gap is. In some instances, a little research on your own and some self-learning would close that gap right away. In other instances, maybe it's a certificate course that you need and not a 4-year bachelor's, and that would suffice. And in some other cases, there may be opportunity to just leverage online courses, sometimes even for free, right? There may be opportunities to leverage online courses, and that's it. And if for those who are employed, it might even just mean requesting a particular training at work, and that's it, all right? Or maybe even just walking across and talking to John Doe in the other departments, right? And that's it. But if you don't know what the knowledge gaps are, you're not even able to categorize them and understand which ones require what kinds of strategy to close them. So number 1, do the assessment. Number 2, measure it against your career goals. And then number 3, categorize the opportunities into different areas and strategies on how to close them. And then number 4, and these are some of a little bit more of the meat and practical pieces of it now. I mean, they're all practical, But number 4 is you want to facilitate knowledge sharing. Now, this can happen in several ways, depending on what, again, the knowledge gap is. So, for instance, if it's an organizational policy knowledge gap or an organizational structure gap. So, let's say you've moved into a new organization and you're trying to learn a lot about the organization, the products and the services that they offer, so that you're positioned to drive the objectives of that organization. One way to facilitate knowledge sharing might be to schedule coffee with different people across different departments, especially as it applies to your work and how they overlap. Schedule coffee times with different people across the organizations. And in those sessions, you want to make clear the objective of the coffee sessions to say, I'm new to this organization. I'm seeking to learn a lot about all the services and products that we offer so that it enhances my work, the work that I do. And I'm also able to enhance the work that you and your team does or your department does. And I want to learn a lot about, I want to learn about what you guys do or what you do in your area and how that and how we can identify opportunities for collaboration to work together, right? And when you go into the sessions, go prepared with questions to ask. Seek to understand what they do, how they do the things they do, what tools they use, and seek to understand the people. Also get to be interested in the actual individuals as well. I'm a big believer in personal relationships. All right, so that's an example of information sharing. And you can also share things maybe even some best practices with where you're coming from, things you've seen, right? And you can share that as well. And together you facilitating that knowledge sharing process. Okay, not to mention it gives an opportunity to build rapport across the organization. So another way you can facilitate knowledge sharing, for instance, is you're a member of, let's say, an online community, right? LinkedIn is such a great tool. I mean, all the funny things that sometimes happen aside, but LinkedIn is such a great tool that people can use to facilitate knowledge sharing as well. Okay, you see a post on something that is related to your industry, comment, like, share, and again, that gives you visibility, online visibility, right, within your industry, and you're gradually also building industry expertise by doing that and learning to put yourself out there. So those are just a few examples on how you can facilitate knowledge sharing. And then the next thing I want to talk about is leveraging online tools and technology. So there are a lot of platforms. Again, I'll go back to LinkedIn as an example, right? There are courses that you can take on LinkedIn at a very minimal fee. And in some cases, there are even free courses, Coursera, LinkedIn. There's a whole lot of them out there. If you remember anyone, please feel free to put them in the chat, in the comments, so that people can access them and learn as well. So there are all these different platforms that you can leverage online learning tools. Okay. And then the next thing I want to talk about is, and this is more of habitual, okay, is set aside a learning block of time in your work. Don't just work. Part of working is taking time to learn what has changed in my industry. For some of us, based on the kind of work that we do, you may be getting newsletters from your industry association. You may be getting sign up. If you're not, sign up to some maybe survey research organizations that do research work, particularly to your organization, to your industry, to your field, so that you can get newsletters on evolving trends, things that are changing, and that way you can keep yourself up to date with things that are happening. But beyond that, also set aside a learning time for yourself. So maybe if it's if in your workplace, in most workplaces, Fridays can be pretty chill. So you can decide to do Friday afternoons or Friday mornings or learning blocks, all right? And make sure you're actually learning things that pertain to helping you grow in your job, because anything outside of that is not approved by your organization is you stealing time from them, okay? But as far as it helps you enhance the work that you do to that organization, for that organization, set aside that learning time. Because one of the things that I tend to hear, and I've been there to myself, of what people say about learning is, I never have the time. And so if it's not a formal paid learning moment by the organization, it's hard for people to engage on their own. But set aside that time and let your manager or anybody else know. As a matter of fact, back to the point on knowledge sharing, you can get your team members along and say, hey, I'm going to learn about this. Let's all do this together. I worked for an organization where they actually do this. It is required of all employees. You actually have to have learning time. And I appreciated that about that organization, because it really just, they had this learning culture. And for organizations, that is something everyone should take note of to do. If you're wondering what that organization is, it's Farm Credit Canada. So yes, take a cue from that, people. And then the other thing you can also do is access your organization's training budget. Oh my God. You don't want to know places. I've worked in places where employees didn't even know that there is a training budget. There is a training budget. Most organizations apparently have training budgets. People, leverage them. Find out what courses you can take to enhance them. Okay, to enhance your workplace, because these adds not just to you, but also to the organization. As a matter of fact, a whole lot more even to the organization, right? Because these are things that you're going to take the learning and you're going to bring it back. And I know some organizations shy away from even having training budgets because they feel like, well, we're going to train them and they're going to take this and go elsewhere. Well, I'm not going to tell you how to run your organization, but again, this holds benefits not just for the individual, but also for the organization. And to be honest, there are many reasons people stay on a job. And for some people, how you train them is enough for them to stay. It's more than enough for some people. So really find out if you don't know this already, I implore you, find out what your organization, and every organization would maybe have a learning budget. And then that would trickle down to departmental budget for learning and development. Find out what it is and leverage those. And if you can't even work this into your performance plan, and that's a whole different ballgame, conversation on how to, leverage performance plans for career advancement. But if you can, find out what it is and see how you can take a slice of that pie. Okay. And then also you can close your knowledge gaps by identifying opportunities for hands-on experience. Okay, so knowledge isn't just about reading books or formal education. You can also learn. Okay, people especially in trades industry would even understand this better because they have a word for it. It's called apprenticeship. All right, they're still gathering knowledge, but it's hands-on experience that exposes you to the knowledge of something. Okay, if there are opportunities for stretch projects, I encourage you to take advantage of them because it will give you an opportunity to learn certain things that you may not know before. And then leverage your industry association memberships. A lot of industry association memberships offer not just professional development trainings, sometimes in some cases just because you're a member you get those trainings for free, and in other cases because you're a member you get them at very minimal fee. Again, sometimes not a lot. And again, check with your organization because some organizations might be willing to pay for some of these. And if you don't ask, you will never know. Okay. And even if they don't pay for you, again, invest in yourself. Okay. Invest in yourself. It's important that we do that because that knowledge stays with you. Whether the organization pays for you or you pay for yourself, that knowledge stays with you and it's to your benefits in the long run too. Right. So, if you're not a member of your industry association, I strongly encourage you to go be a member. Even if it's just the basic membership, at the very least, you'll get a newsletter that sometimes gives you information on things that are going on. And not to even mention job boards. Okay, some of them have job boards and some jobs only would advertise through the industry associations related to that industry. And then finally, identify opportunities for mentorship and coaching where you can. This is very important because sometimes there are some kinds of knowledge that there are, there's something sometimes people refer to as word on the streets. And sometimes there are things that might be going on that you need to know that you may never know on, by going through sheets of paper. You may never know. All right. There are things that people might have to tell you. There are also ways of doing certain things that someone might have their own personal efficient ways of doing certain things, jobs, tasks on the jobs that they can share with you. That's part of the knowledge sharing, right? That they can share with you. And that would really help you excel in your work. So we have looked at all these different ways that you can close the knowledge gap. And this is very important. Now, again, I want to talk a little bit to new immigrant professionals. Part of why you also need to close the knowledge gap is that there are cultural differences. And I talked about nuances earlier. Part of that nuance is also cultural perspectives of doing things. All right. And you need to also understand the Canadian culture. I know that when people talk about, maybe one of these days we'll actually do a deep dive on the Canadian experience, what exactly it means. But one of the things that we're learning and finding out is, and there's research that also is starting to show this, is that what people really mean when they say Canadian experience oftentimes are way more soft skill than people realize. So again, before you go and rush off to say, well, because they told me I don't have Canadian experience, I'm going to go and register for 5 bachelor programs and pay $100,000 that you may not need to pay, and that some people sometimes don't even have to pay. Before you do all of that, conduct that gap knowledge audits for yourself, assessment, and see where exactly that knowledge gap exists. And then so that you know exactly what it is. For some new immigrated professionals, it really is in this cultural space. And that's what it is. Okay. You don't need $100,000 school loan to close such gaps. Knowledge sharing, talking to people who have walked the path before you, and even maybe getting a mentor and or a coach, those would help you close those gaps. I really hope that this has been of great help to you. If there is anything else you'd like to add to this conversation, please let us know. Put them in the comment below. You will be helping someone. If there is, if you have questions around the kind of services we offer, you can check out our website at www.advancedandfulfilled.com, or you can send us an email at info@advancedandfulfilled.com, or reach out to us on any of our social media platforms, and we would be more than happy to help you and work with you. I really hope that this has helped you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and please do us a favor and share so that others can learn from this channel as well. Until next time, I will see you, and take care and good luck out there. Bye.